So are you a person who takes on mentors?
I mean, sure. I just haven't happened to find any.
Okay.
That's a good
All right.
question because we all want mentors, right? Mentors
Yeah.
are valuable, and I want to be a mentor to other people. But that's a much harder thing than it sounds like saying it out loud. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, I want some mentors. Where are they?
Sure.
They don't just come knocking on your door and say, "Hey, Brad, Zach, you're a really good guy, and I want to dedicate a significant amount of my time and resources into you with probably no return besides the feel good part." Mentors, that's a really good question. That's probably been the hardest thing to find throughout the entire experience.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. Today's episode is about entrepreneurship. If you're anything like me, over the course of your career, you've probably thought about striking out on your own. Anytime I've been in a career transition like I am now, I've thought about it. Anytime I've sat in a job situation when I thought, man, there's got to be a better way. I wonder if I could do this better. I've thought about it. And the truth is, there's never been a better time than there is right now to start your own business. But if you've been on the internet, you've probably seen a lot of false claims about how easy it is to start your own business these days, about how you don't have to put in a lot of time, how you can be instantly successful, and about how you can make a ton of money without having to put in a ton of the pain of starting a company. In today's episode, I talked to Zac Coplon, the co-founder and president of Forecast, an assessment software for oil and gas companies. I've known Zac for a long time. I knew him in high school. We played baseball together, and I've followed his career ever since I graduated, especially when I saw that he co-founded this company. This is a great conversation, but it goes a little long, so I'm going to end up breaking this into two parts. But in this first part, we talk about what it was that got him to want to start this company. And it turns out this is the second company that he's co-founded, and he goes into that. He talks about the hiring practices that he does, especially for startups, and what he looks for and why he thinks that's important. He talks about how important it is to have a support system and to be stable in your life when you're starting a company and why he feels that's important. So without further ado, here is my first part of my conversation with Zac Coplon. All right. Hey, Zac. It's good to see you.
Morning.
We were just talking about right before we jumped on here that, we knew each other in high school. It's probably been close to that long. So 20, we'll say 20-ish years since I've really
Yeah.
gotten a chance to see you. But you're one of the people that I've followed, not to sound creepy, but I followed you for a while because I saw that you started this company. And as I was getting back into oil and gas for a little bit, obviously that's the space you're in. So I started seeing more and more stuff about you. And I've always been, I have a cousin and her husband that started a company actually in our hometown. And I've been watching them and just, I've been fascinated by people who have decided to strike out on their own. And so as we went through this concept of a podcast, I started thinking, well, that could be something that people really want to start thinking about. If you're in the midst of a transition and you've been thinking about starting a company, why not look into it more? But I wanted to give an honest assessment of what that means. So,
For sure.
so why don't we get into a little bit of your background? I know you started in banking, but what kind of what was it in your background that kind of led you to wanting to be a co-founder on Forecast?
Well, I'll start with the background, I guess. So I went to school at Oklahoma City University. Played baseball there. That's how Brad and I know each other. We played
Mm-hmm.
baseball growing up years ago. And first job out of college was a position kind of over by Claremore, where we grew up at the Grand River Dam Authority. It was a staff accounting type of position. First job that I found out of college and seemed like something that I want to do. Did that for a year and a half and then ended up moving to a bank in Oklahoma City. So went to Oklahoma City for college, left, came back not long after that, and then worked two different bank jobs from 2013 to 2017-ish. Yeah, that's the right timeline. And then was approached by a former bank client to start an oil and gas company, a small mineral and non-op type of company in Oklahoma City. So that was the first venture out on my own, and it was its own experience. And then after that ended, ran that company for about 3 years, and when that was over, started this company, which we've been about 5 years in now. So that's kind of the short version of the really long story.
Sure.
We get into the whys and the hows for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the kind of that pull that you experienced that kind of thought, man, I should really just go for this? You obviously probably had something when you started the oil and gas company. There was probably some kind of, I don't know, something about it that you really liked. But what was that pull that really kind of said, man, I should just go for this?
Saw people making a bunch of money.
Mm.
That was the pretty short and sweet reason why. And not particularly a person that wants to work for other people. Never have been necessarily. I guess I have some sort of the entrepreneurial spirit and have for most of my life, I guess. Like to do what I want when I want. And that's not always convenient for life, but it's just the way that I am wound, I guess. So the real reason why I started or left banking to get into the first endeavor was to make money. Saw people making money and thought I want to make money too. And I'm not going to make money working a 9 to 5 for the rest of my life. So here's an opportunity. See how it goes.
Yeah.
I had no clue what I was doing. So it's like a leap of faith moment, right?
Sure.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I have some skills, and we'll see if those are sharp enough to go somewhere.
Yeah. And maybe you just answered this, but was that the biggest challenge that you face when you're striking out? Is just kind of you don't know what you don't know. You're just kind of going into a blue lagoon of whatever the proper word is. I've lost it now, but of unknowingness. And
Yeah. Now I say that I knew nothing. Right. I understood finance and some general financial understanding of oil and gas transactions, but I didn't know anything about running a company or managing people or all of the ins and outs of what it takes to actually have a company.
mm,
I got an MBA and I was the president of the entrepreneurial club, and we ran some model simulations on fake companies, but that's not quite the same.
no, no, yeah. When I went and got my master's, I did it was entertainment business is what I went for, and
And you're here now. This is entertainment business. It
yeah, and
worked.
it only took 14 years to, well, that's not true. I guess I had another podcast back in the day for about 8 years, but when I did that, I was the whole span of the class was essentially making a business plan. And I remember at the time I thought that what I wanted to do was be a manager of bands. I thought,
Uh,
I played in bands all through college. I thought, well, shoot, maybe that part of my life's done, but I'd like to still be a part of it. So I'll manage bands. And I even had some guys from Claremore that was in a band that I liked. And I thought, well, okay, I can try to see how that works. And so I went to school And I remember I made this business plan, and yeah, you're right. It is all just kind of on paper. Everything looks great. I remember it was like, well, yeah, we'll just, we'll go to all these shows, we'll do all these things, we'll make money doing that. And then very quickly you find out that especially 10% of $50 is not going to keep a
No,
company going, like
they
if you're
won't
not
even buy
managing a
food.
band that's right. So I mean, what kind of approach, I mean, did you start taking that really started to help you grow and make this into something that would last and you were able to keep going?
Like this current company,
Yeah.
well, both, I guess. But I mean, this company was not started intending to be a software company. The business plan that I wrote on my girlfriend's laptop, since I didn't have a computer at the time. Now my wife, lovely woman, Katie, love you. And it had nothing to do with software. It didn't even have a mention of software. It was an engineering service company. So it was an evolution from the beginning. We struck out on January 27th of 2020, I guess, when we officially opened the doors of that company, and really still didn't have a clue what we were doing. We knew how to evaluate oil and gas deals, and that was our skill set that we believed would generate revenue. But then there's the whole finding deals part, and you know, how are we actually going? We know how we want to make money, but we don't have some guaranteed revenue. We didn't have contracts secured in advance. We had some skills and a network and a stack of business cards from the history of our experiences, and start calling people and seeing who wants our help, which was the exact wrong time to do that. January of 2020, during what I call COVID economics, which are essentially no economics and no work to be had. But we'd started building this tool for ourselves internally. And then when oil went negative $38 on 4/20/2020, then we had hard decisions to make. I had actually essentially taken a job in banking to go back and relieve the company of my salary so that we could continue developing it, but not keep, spending too much money on something that was totally unproven at the time. So I was about to fire myself for the second time from a second company, and combination of timing and luck, and fortunately, product was functional and we could show it to people. So got a couple of meetings with the right people, and feedback was positive enough that we convinced ourselves that we would become a software company despite having no experience or knowledge on how to do that.
Sure.
So,
So what do you think for somebody who's wanting to start a business? What do you think is like a habit or routine that becomes critical for being able to be successful as an entrepreneur?
um, I'm probably not the right person to ask about habits and routines, because I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants every day of my life type of person. So I don't have some routine where I wake up and take an ice bath and eat raw eggs. I mean, you see the memes about founders and what founder mode is like, and these things that founders need to do to be successful. That is not that is not at all how my experience has gone. So I don't know about routines. I think you have to have a risk tolerance that is unlike the majority of people. It's about risk, right? We're going to take a massive risk and hopefully get a massive reward at the end, which plan for that to happen at the end, because it's not going to happen at the beginning. In the beginning, you're probably just going to bleed money until one day the bleeding finally stops. And then you're emaciated and weak and skinny because you've been bleeding out for a few years, right? So you're not really gaining strength along the way. You're just making it work, survival mode, essentially. I don't know. I have a risk tolerance that's high. And I also didn't have money when I started these companies. So all of my equity and contributions to the companies from the beginning was sweat equity. So that is also not something that I necessarily suggest to most people that want to go start companies. Starting companies with no money is probably not the ideal scenario for the people that want to do that.
Right.
So it's been a lot of trial and error, learning things the hard way through expensive lessons, but been fortunate to find partners and investors along the way that believed in me. I mean, in the beginning, that's essentially what they're doing, right? They believe in you. There's no product or service necessarily at the beginning. Find someone that you vibe well with, and that person also has a high tolerance for risk and is willing to put up their money to take the chance on you, essentially, and hope and pray that you do a good job with their money.
Yeah. So are you a person who takes on mentors?
I mean, sure. I just haven't happened to find any.
Okay.
That's a good
All right.
question because we all want mentors, right? Mentors
Yeah.
are valuable, and I want to be a mentor to other people. But that's a much harder thing than it sounds like saying it out loud. Like,
Mhm.
sure, I want some mentors. Where are they?
Sure.
They don't just come knocking on your door and say, "Hey, Brad, Zach, you're a really good guy. And I want to dedicate a significant amount of my time and resources into you with probably no return besides the feel good part." Mentors, that's a really good question. That's probably been the hardest thing to find throughout the entire experience. I mean, my mentors are probably some of my old bosses, but
Mhm.
those people aren't still like actively involved in my life. I can remember quotes and sayings and things that they said to me along the way that are noteworthy, and you put into practice years after you realize that they said something that you should have been paying attention to at the time. But especially in this type of situation that we're in a fairly small niche part of this oil and gas technology area. There aren't very many people that have done this before. I can think of literally one that I know of that has successfully built a similar type of company and succeeded.
Mm.
So finding mentors is not that easy.
Yeah. I remember, gosh, it was a few months ago, right? I was right in the middle of the last stint at the last place that I was at Novus, and I walked into this guy named Drew's office who I just loved. And I think you've met Drew, and
Yeah,
I really just liked him as a person. And I walked in one day because I had this realization that I've been out of school now for 16 or so years, 16, 17 years. And I sat there and I said, I've never had a mentor. I've never had that person that just sat down and took an interest in me and said, I see something in you and I want to like help cultivate that.
yeah,
But one of the things that I realized was that I also was never a person that approached anybody and asked them if they would even be willing to be that. Somehow I thought magically by osmosis it would happen, and this guy would say, "Man, I really like you and I think you're going to be great." And that's just not the way that it happens because, as you
mm-mm,
mentioned, it's a hard gig. There's really not a lot of return for them unless they're trying to get you to a point where you're making money for them.
Exactly.
Like there's not a lot
Yeah.
to that, but it goes both ways because I didn't ask and
Hmm.
I assumed that someone would take an interest in me. And I had people that liked me that I had worked with. Like I still have an old customer from my very first job at Baker Hughes that I still talk to on a regular basis. But he, he's more of a friend and an acquaintance, and he's not,
Right.
I ask him for advice, but it's not like a formal thing. So that's why I always ask about the mentors because I realized that was something that I really wanted, but it's also something I never pursued. And so
Hmm.
as I evaluate myself in this transition period, whether it be I end up doing this podcast full time or I have an actual full time day job, that this becomes kind of something that I do on the side, like that's a part of growth for me is to ask for advice and ask for things.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like you had people that did believe in you and you had to go through that process when you're looking for investors. It's the same
Yeah.
situation. They have to believe in you, as you said. And so I always find
Yeah.
that um, pretty, pretty interesting. But
I did go
so
out and start asking people to be my mentor. At one point, I got to the moment where I was like, okay, I need a mentor because I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm going
sure,
to literally approach the people that I know have been successful. And I started asking, and we don't necessarily have like strong relationships. These are high level people that have succeeded in the industry. But I did start sending out messages and making calls to people who I wanted to be my mentor, but we don't have a relationship. They didn't have
sure,
any reason to mentor me, they didn't have some incentive. But a real mentor doesn't need incentive. I mean, that is a unique person, right? Do I have a
hmm,
mentor right now? I'm not sure I have a mentor right now.
mm,
I'd probably say no. And anybody who approaches you and says, I want to be your mentor, I can almost guarantee you that is not going to be a free experience. That
sure,
is going to cost something.
sure. Well, and it should. I mean,
Sure.
you should have some skin in the game, right? There should be something that you're able to provide to them as well, whether that be
Mhm.
extra value somewhere, maybe it's down the line, but they have to be able to see that there is a return to this. So that, I mean, that makes sense to me.
And
That's
it's going
not,
to cost equity probably, or
yeah,
straight cash from the beginning. You're going to pay them for their mentorship.
sure, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So you all keep a pretty, you're pretty lean, right? You have a few people.
Yep.
Uh, um, but when you're looking to hire somebody, I mean, what are the things, knowing that you're a startup, knowing that there's probably a lot of skin that people have to put into the game, whether that be time, money, whatever that is. I mean, what are some of the qualities that you look for when you're in a startup and you're looking for people to join you?
That's another good question. I mean, in the beginning, you have to find people that you get along with, right? We'll make an assumption that you find people that are talented. If you don't, then what are we doing?
Sure.
But if you partner with or bring on people in the beginning, you're all just a little weird, tight family, right? Like,
Hmm.
how can you not be? If you're not, then you're not working together very closely, I'd say. So in the beginning, when you look for people with skills, there are plenty of people with skills. Then you also have, it's kind of like a marriage. That's actually the way that I usually describe it and compare it. Like looking for business partners in the beginning, or you know, high level technical people, people to fill roles that are key man roles. It is, my wife doesn't like this comparison necessarily, but it's like dating. It's a lot like dating. How long are we going to get along? Do we get along really well? Do you add value to this relationship, this business relationship? Do I add enough value to this business relationship? Do those values sync? If we all have the same skill set, is that a good thing? sometimes it could be, I guess. Oftentimes it's probably not. Like, I mean, my partner Andrew and I are not similar in skill sets at all. He writes 100% of the code and fully in charge of development of the product. I have no clue what he's doing most of the time, but it's something useful and valuable. But I also have no clue what my wife's doing in her job most of the time, but it's something important and valuable. And you find people, you don't want to have to micromanage your partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like in a marriage or any relationship, sitting there constantly wondering what the other person's doing and having to think about that and ask. I mean, we want to have conversations, we want to be in sync and enjoy our time together and not fight. Sometimes we fight, it's okay, but as long as we can get back to the foundation of the relationship, you have to find people that you actually mesh well with. And that's not so much specific to the hiring part. The hiring part of employees is a whole different thing, looking for skill sets and people. We're more talking about partners right now, but in the beginning, everybody's your partner. Your employees,
Mm-hmm.
if whether they're equity based incentives or not, we're all a team and we're all partners, or we will fail.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great place for us to hit the pause button on my conversation with Zac. I want to thank Zac for being willing to come on and share his thoughts on entrepreneurship. And I highly encourage you to come back for part 2 of this conversation because I know it is something you're not going to want to miss. If you're in the oil and gas business and you're looking for an assessment software, I highly encourage you to look up his company, Forecast. That's the number 4 cast.io. But with that, we'll go ahead and end this episode, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.